Good morning, good afternoon, or even good evening for you hardy folks out there. Don Nicastro, staff reporter for CMSWire, with this webinar brought to you by BloomReach and CMSWire, the future of digital experience platforms. Thank you so much for joining us today. Psyched to have you here. Just a little bit about us, folks. One of your hosts today, CMSWire, founded in 2003, lots of editorial contributors, articles, monthly editorial themes, tweet jams, webinars, of course, and focusing on the areas of customer experience, digital marketing, digital workplace, collaboration, and EIM. All right, just a little bit about today's show. Right now we're in the introduction phase. That is about 5 minutes. And then we're going to move on into the meat of the show. You hear from our speakers, about 35 to 40 minutes. And then afterwards, we'll finish up with a live Q&A where we want to hear from you about 10 to 15 minutes. And, you can submit your questions at any time, folks, like even now. You had a question now before the show. You saw the agenda, the script. You want to know if you have something on your mind, go ahead and put it in that Q&A module right now at the bottom left of your browser, and we'll get those into the Q&A queue for the end of the show. So don't be shy. And also those colorful widgets there at the bottom of your browser, there are additional resources, like any technical support that comes up. Hopefully we'll be good to go. All right, and a little bit about our sponsor, BloomReach. Thanks them so much for joining us today. Silicon Valley firm, bring businesses the first open and intelligent digital experience platform, the DXP, designed to build customer experience ecosystems which accelerate the path to conversion, increase revenue, and, of course, grow customer loyalty. You can learn more about these guys at BloomReach.com. All right, there are your speakers. Again, there I am at the top, your moderator for today, Don Nicastro, staff reporter at CMSWire, going on my 4th year here. And our presenters. We are so happy to have Mark Grannan, senior analyst at Forrester, and his co-presenter, Kevin Cochrane, the chief marketing officer at BloomReach. Really happy to have those gentlemen on board. All right, I'm going to start by turning the program over to Mark. Mark, it's all yours. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, Dom. And thank you, CMSWire and BloomReach, for having me on. Dom and I have actually been on stage or virtual stages before, but we actually right now today are only a couple of miles apart. He's, I believe, on the North Shore of Boston, while I'm in Cambridge, Mass., Forrester's headquarters. And so talking to you today about the DX platform research that we've been doing for the past 4.5 years is really exciting because it allows me to bring together a lot of the work we've done with our clients, a lot of work we've done even presenting on stage with folks like Dom. And also, I get the key pleasure to talk about some of the trends we've learned about from our recent wave, the Web CMS wave, in which BloomReach, or Hippo CMS, one of their recent acquisitions, was featured as one of the top performers. So without further ado, let's look at our agenda. So first, let's talk about DX. What is it? What are the trends we're seeing, and what are the must-haves? Secondly, we'll talk about the results of the wave at a high level in terms of what are the things that aren't working and what are the things that are going to work in the future. So how is Web CMS evolving? And then lastly, we'll talk about a few ways in which you can determine how your Web CMS strategy should evolve in light of this broader DX platform conversation. So let's dive right in. The forest for the trees. Yes, I'll totally admit, cliche, right? We can't seem to get out of our own way sometimes. But we sit in our functional silos. We're merchandisers or marketers or content managers. Maybe even we have to sit a little bit higher in the organization. Maybe we're a chief digital officer or a CIO. But even still, we've got some blinders on when it comes to digital experience. And yes, we've probably all heard from Forrester or others in the market where we need to be outside in, right? Customer-centric, customer-obsessed even. But how does that manifest itself when it comes to our technology strategy or our operations? It's a little unclear. So that's why Forrester, about 4.5 years ago, came up with what we call the digital experience platform architecture. And this is the latest version as of about mid-2016, and we're continuing to evolve it. And if you look at this and you see a bunch of colorful boxes on a screen and you're not really sure what the hell you're looking at, that's okay. That's kind of the point. There's a lot going on here. But to summarize, it's essentially the model whereby you abstract all of those complex capabilities that happen to be locked inside your packaged applications and the custom applications you've built that help you deliver customer experiences. You take those core capabilities out, and then you turn them into services. Services which can be orchestrated for any touch point, for any campaign across the customer lifecycle. And when you do that, you gain a certain amount of agility, of nimbleness that allows you to potentially finally catch up to those amazing customer expectations which are causing you and your competition to flounder so badly today. But the question is, okay, I get it. There's content, there's data, there's some CRM capabilities. Hell, there's a lot of analytics here. What do I do today? How do I move the needle today? Well, that comes down to a question of context. And it's a question of about you, your organization. And it comes down to your maturity. And your maturity is a relative thing. Forrester has built a digital maturity model. My colleagues, actually my boss, Martin Gill, and his colleague Char Van Bosterk have published some great research on our digital maturity model. And it's allowed us to really see 4 categories of organizations today. And those start at the bottom with skeptics, moving up into adopters, third collaborators, and fourth differentiators. And what do we mean by those terms? Well, actually, they're a descriptor of a certain set of behaviors. So typically, when skeptics are just starting to understand the basics of digital, they really haven't done a whole lot of investment, right? They're still very much siloed in their organization. Whereas adopters, now they've got some infrastructure, they've got some investment, they've got some movement, they've got some business value. But then collaborators, they've actually started to change how they operate. They've started to break down silo walls. And then lastly, differentiators, they're way out in front, right? They're blazing this path of what it means to be a digital business or customer obsessed. And each of these is backed up by unique strategies. And those strategies actually manifest in the form of a score. So our maturity model is all about a self-assessment that allows you and your organization to potentially understand where we fall in this range of maturity steps as we try to evolve our capabilities towards a digital experience platform architecture. But you might be wondering, okay, 4 models, I'll take that assessment later on, but where is the market today? Well, as of 2015 data, and we published this in 2016, and we're currently doing the survey again this year, the maturity curve is a fairly even bell curve distribution. So what you're seeing here is a histogram, and the bulk of the market is focused on adopters and collaborators, which is good news, right? We aren't all lumped at the back of being skeptics. And there aren't too many differentiators to make us feel too terrible about our lack of progress. But the questions are now, how do we move forward as adopters and collaborators? Or specifically, how as adopters, how do we actually start to do what the collaborators are beginning to do? How do we break down those silo walls? Well, a simple concept actually helps us out here. And it's the old yin and yang. And actually, we would call this digital customer experience and digital operational excellence. It's 2 very simple philosophies, obviously mated together. But the difference is here, they're actually fueling each other. So the data and insights coming off of your customer's experience fuel your operational excellence as to how you refine and automate. And then those automations actually give you the slack and the ability to find new sources of value in the form of digital products and services that create net new value for your customers. So that's how we're getting to that third tier, optimizing that third tier where most of us are focused today. And one last thing around this notion of digital customer experience and digital operational excellence. And for those of you who were at the DX Summit last year at CMSWire's event in Chicago, you'll remember this slide because I presented it there. I like to think of these two things as partners, as a balance. And the analogy here is sailing. So for any of you who are sailors out there or understand the basic principles of thermodynamics, you understand that when you're trying to sail directly towards a point where the wind is coming from, you simply can't. There's no way to harness that wind. And that's what we're seeing. The top right here is where the CX headwind is coming from. And if we want to achieve that goal, we can only point about 45 degrees off the wind. So therefore, we're going to do a series of tacks. So first, we might do some investment in customer experience, so personalization or mobile enablement. But then we balance it out with some process automation or improving our cost of service. And if we repeat that innovation and automation again and again, we're slowly going to get towards this end goal of rethinking our success metrics, which is really what we're all about here today when it comes to breaking down those siloed walls, and also about decoupling and API enabling, which is all about what the technology architecture picture I mentioned earlier is all about, creating services that can be orchestrated towards any goal, and it can be repeated across the customer's journey. So that's the philosophy here. That's what we're talking about when we mean DX. It's building an architecture and it's tackling it very strategically to help you move from where you are today to where you want to go in the future. Now, unfortunately, this is big. This is enterprise-wide. This is a pillar of digital transformation. So what can we do to help us move the needle today? Well, luckily, like I mentioned earlier, our wave on WebCMS recently published. And in that wave, Hippo, along with 14 other products, were evaluated in a very transparent set of criteria. And we went through demos, customer reference calls, partner reference calls, many hundreds of hours aggregated into this research process. And I distilled it down into the 4 areas that I think are changing the most today. Unfortunately, those areas are often broken in today's organizations, in companies like yours. Now, the 4 ways in which WebCMS broken starts fundamentally with content. Now, here is a virgin picture of a content lifecycle, something many of us in the editorial world would know and recognize. And you'd identify the multiple steps here of requirements through prototyping, creation, tagging, orchestration, delivery, tracking, analysis, optimization, and hopefully reuse. Unfortunately, honestly, most of these aren't happening today. If we're tagging, we aren't doing it consistently. If we're tracking, we're doing it at a page level. If we're analyzing, well, chances are that's only for some sort of blurry engagement metric that isn't really tied to the content. And lastly, if we're optimizing, it tends to be some sort of basic A/B test that doesn't lead to much reuse. And in short, much of our investment in content goes in the trash. Now, when it comes to web publishing, those workflows simply haven't evolved. We've got 2 halves, basically broken out into create and deliver, and they're very much a waterfall model. And this sort of static workflow is simply creating pinch points or bottlenecks today. And many of us live and breathe this when we realize we can't get our website updated in real time based on real-world events or on a promotion. And that sort of frustration is leading us to work around traditional technologies, creating even greater fragmentation. Third, we very much experience friction in the form of our web operations. So as we deploy new code to the site, as the production site is updated to reflect new patches, or as we start to embrace new technical capabilities on the platform, we understand just how slow we are today. So much customization, so much heavy lifting is done that is very slow and expensive. And the metaphor here is obviously this picture of, stevedores in the age of sailing ships that carried cargo in their holds, where you'd manually lift crates and sacks and barrels into the hold and stack them very precariously. That sort of custom workflow is what we're experiencing today. And what we're hoping to move towards is what I'll get to in a minute, but it's about standardization. And then lastly, number 4, it's all about lack. Oh, and I apologize. For those of you, this is actually an extra slide. For those of you who aren't history buffs around shipping analogies, and you thought that was a little bit of an arcane comparison, I will say that you probably will recognize traditional on-prem sourcing life cycles. And it starts with hardware, it moves through software, then implementation, deployment, maintenance, and upgrades. And how many of us honestly feel that we have these questions along the way around capacity and users and workflow and who's managing this and maintaining this, and then, oh no, we need to replatform. Actually, so we go back to step 1. There is very little that is leveraged from existing technologies when we do this traditional on-prem lifecycle, which is reflective of the friction in our web publishing models or web operations. And so it's that same comparison, right? It's all about standardization and optimization. So lastly, let's talk quickly about the 4th one. The 4th problem is that practitioners, many of you on the call run teams. Those teams are charged with personalizing and optimizing the experiences of your customers. Actually, we know that. That's one of the top goals of all retailers we survey. So when you attempt to personalize an experience on the website or on the mobile or in a mobile app or in an email campaign, it's which tool, which combination of tools, what workflow, because nothing within your tool suite owns this end to end. And so the image here is actually one of a bunch of sticky notes around my monitor, and you probably can't see the text, but I was scribbling out examples whereby you'd say, let's tag in Adobe, let's track in Google, let's personalize and optimizely. Oh, but well, the emails go out through Marketo, and it's this fragmentation of packaged tools that really creates confusion. Or, on the other hand, the tools just aren't there at all. We haven't been able to make the investment because they're so damn expensive. So those moments of frustration are countered by another problem when it comes to, actually, I'll pause there, matched by another problem whereby those rules don't necessarily scale. But we actually want to take a quick break, and I'm going to ask Dom to come back and help me out here. So based on these 4 problems, the first being content lifecycles, the second being web publishing, the third is web operations, and the 4th is practitioner tools for personalization, we want to run a quick poll. So Dom?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. Thank you so much for this, and we'll get to our poll now. We want to hear from you guys. So there's your question right there on your screen. The question is, what is your greatest pain point with CMS today? And here are your choices. You get the content lifecycle, the inability to tag, track, and analyze content performance, web publishing, time-consuming, siloed publishing, limiting agility and speed, web operations, friction with IT to enhance the scale website functionality, delivery, tools. You see all the choices there. You can do all of the above or none of the above. Very interested to hear what you have to say. We have a lot of folks on the line today, and we're really happy about that. We're going to get a nice little breakdown, we think, here. So take your time to get an answer and read through those and choose the one that best fits your organization right now. While we're waiting for the results to come in, Mark, you missed a golden opportunity to talk about the Patriots' 5th Super Bowl championship this Sunday that we're going to be watching and cheering on. When you mentioned Boston earlier.
It's hard to do anything to move at all in New England right now without hearing about the Pats. So we have a lot of excitement. in New England, I'm sure around the country.
Apologies to those Atlanta tech companies on the line right now and tech practitioners, but you got a challenge coming ahead of you. Speaking of challenges, Mark, the greatest pain points in terms of the answers that we'll be getting from our listeners. Any predictions on what we'll see mostly here?
I think it depends on the makeup of the audience, honestly. But my hunch is either web publishing or personalization. But we'll see.
Yeah. Kevin Cochrane, I know you're still on. Oh, I was going to ask you a prediction, Kevin, but they already came in. And we get a little bit of a balance here, guys. All of the above is your winner with a third, pretty much a third of the audience saying that, followed by the tools, the proliferation of complex tools to manage those discrete interactions and moments. That was second. And then third being the web publishing time-consuming silo. So, hey, Kevin, why don't you jump in for a sec here? Kevin Cochrane, CMO of BloomReach, and just give us your take on those answers, from the community, from our listeners, and how you think those shaped up.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually fascinating that they're pretty well distributed. I think this actually points to a matching with Mark's maturity model. If you look at the people that identified as all of the above, they're probably the people that are kind of in that differentiator, kind of that head of the tail, or they're kind of late stage collaborators. So I think it's actually fascinating. I think the other thing here is that the pains are being felt in different aspects. I know, Mark, you thought that there would be a heavy preponderance of web publishing. I find it fascinating that really different people are experiencing different pain depending on where they are in their life cycle. And, I think that your next section, Mark, where you start introducing some of the ways that we need to rethink web CMS to fix it, I think are going to be quite fascinating for the audience here. So I'll turn it back to you, Mark.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Dom. So yes, as Kevin mentioned, we're going to now figure out how is the web CMS landscape evolving here to fix these problems, these four problems. And luckily, as Kevin mentioned, we got a nice distribution across all four, and even the biggest groups say all four are inclusive. We have all of these problems. So you're going to find, I think, value in each of these next few slides. But let's get to how are we solving for number one, content lifecycle. So actually, it's an answer with AI in it. And who knew that we'd see artificial intelligence pop up in this webinar? But my colleagues, Brandon Purcell and Rowan Curran, have recently published an AI Tech Radar. And in that report, you'll see this graphic. And it's a graphic all about sense, think, and act. And it's a rotating process that is centered around learning about a core focus. And in many cases, it's about the customer. But in this case, it's about content. And specifically, you'll see the categories of technologies that make up sense and think and act. Well, there's image and video analysis. Well, what if we can automatically tag our assets so that we don't have to do that manually? That editorial workload is off our plate, or at least a big portion of it is. And we can scale that across numerous repositories that maybe we've never touched, maybe we've never even indexed. In addition to that, we can do speech analytics and text analytics to determine sentiment and tone and start to match that to intent. And that will be hugely important as we start to embrace new touchpoints like chatbots and virtual agents. So it's adding granular metadata to your content. It's actually extracting the metadata that's already there. And then it's allowing you to enrich that profile over time. So by tracking the content on your site, not the page, not the campaign, but the content. If we understand how the content is performing, then we can start to understand how to optimize the creation of future content or even automate the future of content. How cool would it be to take a pattern library and a style guide and a list of or a set of assets of photographs, for example, from a promotional shoot, and have it automatically compile the appropriate versions of that campaign content. I mean, that is the future we're really heading towards. And that allows you then to farm that out via personalization, which I'll get to later. But you can be that much more granular when you have that rich metadata and ability to target your content. So secondly, how are we repairing the web publishing model? So initially, we had create and deliver, right? Well, now we're seeing the arrival of this new model of headless content. And it's the ability to replicate the repository and to store content in a very agnostic way. So I mentioned JSON and XML here. And then to leverage RESTful APIs to publish out to new endpoints. Things like mobile apps, where they already have a presentation layer that you would never begin to control with your web CMS. And therefore, we can reuse our content. And this builds off, number one, right? If we have granularly tagged content, and then we can point it at the right endpoint, the new channel like mobile, all of a sudden we get a really rich reuse and a really targeted focus of that content. And it gets better because if we can start to include more content, let's just pick on user-generated content for now. If you're a brand that has a lot of social media activity from your clients, there's a rich vein of content to tap into there. And so if you can start to then use that with your campaign engine, all of a sudden you're probably publishing back out to social with some of the same assets your clients, your customers are creating. Potentially increasing your content velocity and certainly decreasing your content spend. So third, what about web operations? And the old analogy was all about shipping, right? And even if you don't get shipping, you'll certainly recognize this picture. This picture is in modern day shipping. This is one of these huge, massive freight liners with thousands and thousands of semi-truck long boxes on it, right? And those boxes, those standard shipping containers, were the brainchild of a man named Malcolm McLean when he envisioned what shipping could be if you end-to-end automated and standardized those capabilities. That's what's happening with platform as a service and cloud today. New technologies like Docker, package managers like Kubernetes, they are truly revolutionizing what it means to deploy software because it allows you to be platform agnostic. You can run that anywhere. And it's much more replicable, much more scalable than our old virtual machines. And lastly, it'll probably bring your costs down and your efficiency up. And again, for those of you who aren't a big shipping analogy people like me, maybe you'll remember our software lifecycle where we said it was super slow, a lot of friction. Well, think of it, here's managed services, right? All of a sudden we take away provisioning our hardware. And we're actually sourcing a software and a service combined so we don't have to do the maintenance down the road. And then we think, okay, now with this automation that Mark just mentioned, we can actually go to a full-blown PaaS model, which actually adds scale where maybe a managed services didn't have it natively. We can source a service, and then we configure and extend it rather than doing raw customization. And that's where we're headed. That's where PaaS takes a lot of friction out of this web operational model. And then lastly, the personalization tools. So tools that really democratize segmentation, testing, and targeting are built on analytics. And in the picture you're seeing here, it's a workflow all about where a predictive model allows you to ingest data from multiple sources and then in real time deliver that model or that data into your experience delivery engine. And then the exhaust, the analytics, the learnings, the monitoring from your website come back and feed that engine again. So that's the model, but really in execution, we're making the tools easier. We're giving practitioners the ability to run an A/B test without having to have a master's degree in statistics. We're giving folks the ability to do segmentation on the backs of an algorithm. We can find the meaningful segments. You don't have to have really great gut instincts around what differentiates one group of customers from another in terms of their motivations. So by making those tools easier, we're giving them to more and more practitioners within the business, and therefore you can be your own art director, you can be your own statistician, you can be your own editorial manager because these tools are getting smarter. So that's how these four areas are being fixed today in WebCMS, and that's why it really is truly a revolution. And so I definitely encourage you to read the Wave report, and if you're a Forrester client, download the model and customize the weightings to match your priorities. We'll get to more of that in here in just a second. But how do we choose? And this is always a difficult question. I take hundreds of inquiries from our clients a year as they try to balance priorities and determine what's the right investment. And specifically within WebCMS, we get a lot of interest. But I think the best message for us here today is to say, look back to where we were just a few minutes ago. Remember your roots. Look at your maturity model. Take the assessment, or at least begin to understand what the assessment represents, and understand maybe where you are today. Have you really begun to move from adopter to collaborator? And be honest. I mean, this assessment only works if you're honest. And with this knowledge, either explicitly by taking the survey, understanding your raw score, or just more generically by sort of introspectively understanding where you and your organization are, you can start to plot out your next move. And so I'll bring back the sailing diagram, or at least the 2x2. And we'll overlay this model. We'll overlay this 2x2 of customer experience and operational excellence with our 4 tiers of maturity. And we can start to understand that if by chance we're here, if we're way back, low on customer experience, low on operational excellence, we have this on-prem, desktop, web-only system, that we have a few options that are adjacent to us. We don't need to jump all the way to differentiation today. We can't iterate towards that goal. So what would those options maybe look like? Well, I put a few here just as examples. So 1, 2, and 2A. So 1, if we want to move the needle on customer experience, we'll roll out a new mobile-friendly site. We can probably do that on our existing platform. Or maybe we'll do that with a separate system that'll sit side by side. And chances are it might be a separate code base because we couldn't quite do a full redesign, but at the very least, we'll have a mobile-friendly search result. We'll have that welcome mat open to those customers looking for us on Google on their mobile device. Now, second, if we felt that our operations were really the piece that are hamstringing us today, maybe we do take our licensed software and we ask our vendor or our partner to run it for us. And we say those upgrades, those maintenance, that life cycle, we really just couldn't get out of our own way. And this could be a bigger part of your digital transformation. The CIO might have to be involved here, as this represents a key piece of his staff or her staff. And then on top of that, though, if you said, let's do a combination of both, it could be let's do a combo. Well, let's move to that managed service, which frees up our talent, but also let's now dedicate that talent to helping us roll out a new personalization module that's going to run on top of our site. It's going to allow us to do some basic segmentation testing and targeting and start to track our wins. Now, that would be what we're doing with the current platform. Now, many of you might be, like many of our clients, they get to the end of their 3 to 5 year use of an old WebCMS, and you say, okay, well, actually, let's scrap this thing. We've customized it all to hell. It's more expensive than it's worth. Let's buy something new. And that's the way their CapEx and OpEx budgets are just orchestrated. So on a new platform, let's say there might be 3, 4, or 4A. So 3, say we're going to prioritize in this new investment the practitioner tools. So we need multi-device WYSIWYG capabilities so that we can do really clean, responsive, and adaptive. And we're also going to overlay A/B testing because we actually want every single thing, every single experience we roll out, we want to A/B test. Okay, so we prioritize those feature sets, And we start to look for the tools that are really good at those things. Now, conversely, let's say we need to increase our operational excellence. Well, let's embrace not just managed service. Let's go full-blown PaaS now. And also, we want to make sure there's some DevOps capabilities there because continuous integration, continuous delivery, that's super important to our tech philosophy now because we want to always be testing and learning. It's an iterative, agile process, and that is going to be reflected in how our CMS is architected and launched. So then you weight those priorities, those capabilities higher, and it's, our Wave tool or other market research would allow you to find the tools that are best suited for that need. Now what if it's sort of a combo play, right? I want both those things. Well, in fact, this would be starting to nudge from collaborator into differentiation territory. You're going to look at adding on a headless solution or having a headless repository that's going to mirror your current repository. And that JSON content is going to be able to be published into a JavaScript front end. And maybe that's on your website. Maybe you're doing an Angular or React portion of your site because that transactional experience is just that much better when it functions like an app, not rendering like a page. So these are the notions of maturity, and if you're trying to move the needle in one direction or the other, or move from one stage of maturity to the next, you can start to shape your priorities and use the market research out there to help find the tools that are appropriate. And it's this philosophy of moving to the next step or just moving the needle in one direction so that you can do that tacking of innovation and automation that you should replicate across all the trees in your forest, all the different digital experience capabilities, because it's the same philosophy. It's the same model. So in closing, I think there's a few key takeaways here. The first one, your maturity, the maturity of this industry, it's spectrum-based. That's built on top of customer centricity and operational capabilities. Luckily, we can find out what our maturity is today. And when we know that maturity, we can find the permutation of tools that suit our need, and we can examine the possible patterns, those options that I just walked through. And lastly, we can use this evolution, this notion of a maturity curve to frame our investments so it doesn't feel like we have to do everything all at once. We can build out our roadmap as we progress forward. And that's why this is the future of DX. This is really mapping your future as you move forward. So with that, a hearty thank you for putting up with me for the last 30 minutes or so. I think now we're probably going to move on to the Q&A session. So I'll invite Kevin on.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mark. This is Kevin Cochrane, Chief Marketing Officer here at BloomReach. Mark, we've been long fans of Forrester research and your research in particular. And your research has governed the evolution of our CMS, Hippo, and most recently has guided the strategy for the coming together of Hippo with BloomReach, which is an AI platform for driving personalized digital experiences to increase the optimization to drive revenue and lift on your websites. So we couldn't be more excited to listen as every other member of the audience is listening to your presentation. I personally found it extremely educational, and I know that the entire BloomReach team and Hippo team is thrilled to be able to have learned from you today. But I did want to actually open up some Q&A, and I wanted to ask you some questions as well as encourage everyone in the audience to add their questions as well. So Mark, I actually want to start with this notion of content lifecycles being broken. Obviously, with the coming together of Hippo and BloomReach, we're now adding AI to content. And myself, as a CMO, I personally spend 60% of my dollars on digital campaigns where the core of that campaign is actually the content assets that we're looking to use to engage our audiences. And so I guess the question really I have is, why haven't we, up until this point, had CMS's focus on content analytics, on optimization, and the appropriate delivery of that content based on discovered user intent? how did we get to a point where we allowed content lifecycles to be so broken?
It's a big question, but a great one. I think we got here for a number of reasons. First, obviously, it's the pivot from analog to digital, right? So the original pivot to web back in the late 90s or early 2000s, we still kept the notion of, we even called it a web page, right? It's very much an experience on a screen that we think of as a collective experience. But we didn't really think about the individual elements of that page too much. The designers did that, and that was much further up the life cycle. But then we got to mobile in 2008, 2009, and we started to understand, okay, now these need to be relative to the screen. So we need to have certain percentages, and we'd have fluid grids and flexible layouts and responsive images. But we still didn't focus on the content itself. It was a means to an end. It was further up the food chain where the content was actually produced, and once it was assembled, we didn't maintain the granularity of focus as to see how well that content performed. So I think from where I sit, we lost focus somewhere along the way, but we also didn't fully take advantage of the tools. The tools became capable of tagging specific assets, tracking their performance, but we weren't staffed for, or we weren't focused on tracking individual content performance. But now we both have the capabilities to track it, but we also have what you mentioned, AI. We have AI to help us here. It can be a set of tools to help accelerate and extend our capabilities to actually tag many more assets or go 10 times deeper in terms of the level of metadata. And then it allows us to use that metadata for the purposes of personalization, which has promise of lifting engagement and also business value. So I think we're as an industry finally waking up to the fact this content, as you mentioned, is very expensive. Some of my colleagues in the content marketing practice, they've shown that at least 8% of content marketers spend their budgets just on the content creation. That's not on the orchestration and the delivery. And that budget is essentially being wasted, or it's a recurring budget. And I think if we tap into it as a resource, we'll start to leverage the savings to drive new content, new experiences.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Mark. And I want to actually ask you an additional question to follow on that. It's funny. I really wonder if sometimes we place too much burden on marketers for things that maybe they shouldn't be entirely focused on. If you think back to original web content management systems, we really, as you said, wanted to break the webmaster bottleneck. We wanted to enable people to create and publish pages. And most recently in the digital marketing revolution, we put additional burden on marketers to actually think about how to optimize using new tools that actual web page experience to drive conversions, to drive leads, to drive revenue. And I really wonder if really what we're getting back to is getting back to the basics of getting people in the organization to focus on really quality content and understanding who that content is really targeted for, and spending our time and energy thinking about the message, thinking about the actual educational material, and then allowing kind of the machine to extract the meaning of that content and to match it with user intent. And I guess the question then, Mark, is part of the reason that we need to get back to the basics because we've actually, in the most recent evolution of CMS, put too much burden on marketers. And do we really now just get back to the basics, focus on content, focus on the audience, focus on the customer need, focus on the message, and let the machine do everything else?
So in a word, yes, but I still think we can't let the marketers, we can't let ourselves off the hook too easily, right? And also because we as an organization, we as an industry won't be able to tolerate all that change all at once. We won't be able to hand the decisioning over to an algorithm overnight. So we'll have to treat this as almost a retreat away from the scenario you described. a steady retreat away from overburdening ourselves with too many complex workflows and too many complex tools, and really getting back to that more pure message of customer engagement and customer service. And I think it'll be slow. I think it'll be an evolutionary set of steps that'll get us there. And you could start by taking certain pieces off your plate. So rather than saying we're going to try to do rules-based targeting across these 12 personas in these 6 campaigns, something that really truly is hard to scale, say, well, let's just take a piece of that. Let's do the segmentation model. Let's see what the algorithm finds. Let's see where the meaningful groupings are based on the data it has and the data that service provider has. And same thing with the testing and the optimization. Rather than designing these complex tests, let's just let the multivariate testing solutions potentially start to find the right matches for us. And they have large-scale data sets to bring to bear on the problem too. So it's not handing the keys to the robots and saying, you drive. I think it's let's start to lighten the burden on ourselves as we start to iterate towards this message of what do we do that's fundamentally unique and that we can do best so that we can let the other tools do what they do best.
Yeah, Mark, very wise counsel. And, here at BloomReach and Hippo, we couldn't agree more. It's all about kind of reducing the complexity and surfacing interesting moments based on what the machine can learn so that humans can get involved to curate the experience and take meaningful action. So we couldn't agree with you more. Dom, I'd like to also bring you into the dialogue here and ask you a question. Obviously, Don, you're a stalwart of the industry, having educated all of us on CMSWire for the past 4.5 years. And, since 2013, you've been one of the people that has helped us map the complexity of the space and understanding it from both the customer perspective, the thought leader perspective, and more. What are some of the changes that you've seen in terms of content management and where it's heading in terms of trying to fix some of the key pain points that Mark has brought up here today? Would love your perspective, Dom.
Well, thanks for the question, Kevin. It's nice once in a while for someone to ask me what I think, where I spend my full day asking others what they think, right? But first I want to remind listeners that if you want to ask questions, you certainly can, and at the bottom left of your browser anytime, just go ahead and pop a question in there. But Kevin, to your question about what's changed in the DX landscape, I think there's no better example, and also no better time to do a shameless plug than our Digital Experience Summit. It began in 2015 and continued this year. We doubled our audience from year to year. And, that tells you something right there. We listen to our readers, we listen to our customers, what they want to see. And it's DX, it's the delivery and the execution of digital experience, but, they need a way to collaborate with peers, because they're trying to overcome these organizational and technical silos. So we feel like that summit is a great example of that and a great place to do that. But more so, what else has changed? I actually looked to Mark's Forrester Wave on WebCMS last week that published. It's a really popular report that comes out. And, we see CMS as an amazing indicator of the overall DX market. Mark's colleague, Ted Shadler, said, he once wrote that, web content management is the backbone of digital experience delivery. So it's kind of like where CMS goes, the DX market goes. And, I went back to 2013, the wave from 2013 that Forrester put out. And you look at the requirements, right, for WCM, content management, websites and layout, globalization, localization, content targeting, multi-channel, social and community controls, publishing and deployment, measurement. Now, I'm not saying those things 4 years later are not important, but now look to what Mark wrote last week and his colleagues in the Forrester Wave 2017. Now what's important? Content structure and metadata, experience management features for practitioners, technical product architecture, and package extensions. So Forrester sees it as, buyers they have smart content, targeted experience, agile operations, and that all translates into contextual DX, contextual digital experiences for us. The differentiators you ask, it's semantic content, it's API, it's cloud and marketing, just like Forrester said last week. And because of this, you see vendors like, BloomReach coming into the fray and getting noticed in reports like this. The vendors that are embracing open architecture are the ones that are making the gains.
Great, Don. And I think the openness of CMSWire to various different perspectives and your ability to listen and really create kind of a quality dialogue with your customers has always been a hallmark of your service. And I think that when we look at what's happening in content management, it's taking that openness and understanding who our customers are and making certain that we can integrate all these different systems, integrate all these different tools, focus on producing high-quality, meaningful content that we can describe in a meaningful way in order to tailor its delivery to the user. So I couldn't agree with you more. And I'd like to also take some questions now from the audience. And I'd like to take a question from John Hines. So John, thank you very much for the question. Your question: I know the trend is for these CMS platforms to do everything in capitals. I get that this is good for the CMS vendor, but what if I don't want to run everything through the CMS? We can still be mature and not use Adobe for everything, right? Well, John, I will quickly jump in. We don't think you should necessarily use Adobe for everything here at BloomReach Hippo, but why don't we turn that over to you, Mark, to address John's question. What are your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So John, I think you're right? Because Web CMS has a pretty big mandate on its shoulders now, if you really want to think of it through the lens of digital experience. But I would go back to this notion of services, right? And I showed the picture of the digital experience platform architecture. And if we take what each of those areas represents as a core focus, and we say which tools can support that capability or that set of services, then Web CMS has a pretty strong relationship across a few of them. Not all, though. So it's going to touch content for sure. It's going to have a relationship certainly to contextual delivery. There's going to be elements of extensions and code. But then you could say, well, maybe we don't need it to be the customer data platform or repository. Maybe we'll have another solution do that profile aggregation for our customers, because that actually represents a more secure workload that needs to be subject to different requirements. Or maybe it's a tool set that's better at segmentation, and therefore we're going to take that off CMS's plate. Similarly, analytics. Maybe our BI and our data science and our workbench tools simply go way, way, way deeper than our Web CMS analytics capabilities do. So maybe we won't have that as part of it. And then there's even the option that we could even take off the contextual experience delivery. So some of the vendors in this category offer that as a modular add-on. So maybe you say, well, I'm actually going to choose to swap that in only on certain categories of sites that I run. Maybe I have half a dozen sites, but 3 of them represent high-value, high-touch engagement. 3 are simply investor relations and other sort of things. So I'm not going to leverage those sites with this module. So I think it's a matter of picking and choosing the right capabilities that Web CMS is really good at, and then doing that across the board so that you can start to orchestrate those services and dial them in for the appropriate phase or piece of the customer journey.
Mark, that was a wonderful answer. Very much appreciate that. And I definitely think it points to what people need to look for differently in evaluating their CMS, kind of the modularity of the contextual delivery, the modularity of being able to fit into an API architecture so you can actually deliver content as a service on demand to mobile apps and new digital touch points, I think is actually very, very, very key. So Once again, thank you so much for that answer. We have another question for you as well. This one comes from Gordon O'Keefe. So Gordon, thank you for the question. So Mark, what in your opinion is the most important building block for moving forward with your digital experience strategy, content or data? To clarify, it's more content strategy versus data strategy. I am curious about as the driver. It's easy to create quality content or have large data sources. So content strategy or data strategy, which comes first, the yin and the yang, Mark?
Interesting question because I think it depends on your organization. But I would say as an industry, we went with data first. I feel like the last few years we've been focused pretty hard on customer analytics, customer understanding, building this 360-degree profile of the customer. And even in the results of this poll on today's webinar, content analytics or content workflow was the lowest of the four options. But I think the pendulum's swinging, right? So once we start to have enough data around the customer, we have to match that with content. So it's got to be both. And I think as an industry, we're starting to appreciate the need for balance, and the pendulum's going to swing, and we're start to tap this rich vein of content and extract value from it, and then marry the two rich data sets, content plus data, to deliver contextual experiences. So it's not necessarily which one. It's probably more of a sequencing question, and that just depends on your investments to date.
Great. Thanks, Mark. And this question also relates to our last question here today, which is a question from Mike Kennedy, which is, Mike's question was, what process do you suggest to get a unified view of customer data? And I think in light of your last answer, I think maybe how do you do this in the context of delivering the right content to the customer? How do you actually do this in the context of the right content?
Sure. So this one is a big topic. I have colleagues who focus exclusively on master data management and the data cleansing, data quality, also on data integration. So a big topic we could spend all day on. But in the context of personalization and how do we aggregate the right customer data in the moment, I think we start simply. Honestly, we start with what we know. Right? We know what the customer's profile, hopefully, and then we can market to existing customers. Maybe then we can also layer on location. We can layer on previous purchase history. And then we iterate from there. We add the right data as it's appropriate and test to see if we get increased engagement with that customer segment. So I think the unified view of the customer is an ongoing programmatic aspect of what you're building. It's not a simple one-and-done project. So unfortunately, I have to be the bearer of bad news there, that it's going to require continued investment and continued focus.
Yeah, I think that's wise counsel. I think this gets back to your clear blue water slide and how you need to tack to the wind. You need to inject additional customer insights from your 360-degree view program to put it in the hands of your marketers to make it actionable, where they can actually test and optimize and then inject the next bit. So it's a sequencing thing, and I do recommend that everyone look hard at that tacking to the wind analogy slide that you so clearly articulated. So everyone, thank you so much for joining today's webinar. I know we're getting out of time, so thank you so much to our audience for the fine questions. And Dom, I'd like to pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Kevin and Mark, of course, Mark Grannan of Forrester, Kevin Cochrane of BloomReach for the great insights. Great questions, too, from the audience. Thank you. And there's a few that we may not have gotten to, so just stay tuned if you're listening. There will be a follow-up there, so thank you for your questions as well. Again, it's been my pleasure. This is Dom Nicastro from CMSWire with BloomReach hosting this webinar on digital experience. If your company is interested in sponsoring a webinar just like this, just please email us at webinars@cmswire.com. Dom Nicastro for CMSWire signing off. Hey, have a great day, folks.